In this video, I'm checking out a brand new release from Rokinon. This is the Rokinon 35mm F1.8 AF, and the AF stands for Autofocus. It is a full-frame Sony E-mount lens that has autofocus, and it's kind of a rival to Sony's own 35mm F1.8 at a much lower price. So first and foremost, let's see how it comes packaged, or at least what comes in the box. So there's not a whole lot to the packaging. The box is nice. Inside of the box there is some foam padding, and the lens comes in a nice rubberized plastic zippered pouch. I should add that you also do get a manual. Taking a closer look at the lens itself, it is very compact and very lightweight. The construction is made out of some sort of polymer plastic. Looking at the very back of this lens, you have a metal lens mount. You have electronic connections because this lens again does have autofocus. There is a nice little rubberized gasket around the very edge of the mount. This gasket is one of 4 total gaskets that do make this lens weather sealed. In very small writing, you can see that this lens is made in Korea. Moving forward from the back, it is a pretty simple looking lens. It has a nice red ring accent around the very front of it, Rokinon logo on one side, technology by Samyang optics, and then there is a unique custom switch on the side of this lens. This switch is customizable, but straight out of the box, mode 1 is for manual focus. If you switch to mode 2, the same ring can be used to adjust your aperture. You see this a lot with more expensive lenses, so it's nice to see this incorporated on a budget option. Speaking of that focus ring or aperture control ring, it is very smooth as you rotate it left to right. It is very lightweight as far as resistance. It is not connected mechanically to anything in the lens, so it is electronic, but it is a nice ring to use for either manual focus or controlling your aperture. Around the very front of the lens, you'll see some markings here. So you have the type of the lens, 58mm filter thread, and then your minimum focusing distance of 0.29 of a meter or 0.95 of a foot. The front lens element is pretty average sized for a 35mm. I'd say it's on par with any of the other Sony 35mm out there. If you look through that front glass, you'll see a 9-bladed circular aperture. This lens is composed of 10 elements in 8 groups. Again, it is weather sealed, and it comes in at a whopping 210 grams, which is very, very lightweight. In fact, on Rokinon's website, they claim that this is the smallest and lightest f1.8 prime lens available for full-frame Sony E-mount. And at least as of the date of this video, I am not aware of a lens that is smaller than this. That's a 35 f1.8. The lens also comes with a generic looking plastic rose petal lens hood that does snap nicely into place. When you mount this lens to a camera such as the A6100 here, it looks really nice on this camera, and it is so lightweight. It feels just like having your kit lens on the camera. The important thing is, how does it perform? So I took it out with my A6100 with my wife and our little son, and took a couple of samples and maybe a couple of videos. Let's take a look at those. All of these are handheld, no post-processing, no editing, and these are just JPEGs straight out of the camera. So that is it for the sample photos, and I am very pleasantly surprised by this lens because initially when I got it, the lightweight, it kind of didn't feel very premium, so I was expecting it to maybe not perform that well, but it is very sharp. Now, in fact, to test out sharpness, I decided to do a little three-way comparison. So what I did was, I took this lens, I took my trusty Sigma 30mm f1.4, and then I also took this, which is the Samyang 35mm f2.8 autofocus lens that I reviewed a couple of videos ago. Very sharp lens. And I just took a shot at f4 of our living room. I focused all three of these lenses on the same exact tree sign, so that way it's a pretty fair comparison. So in this first side-by-side comparison, you can see the Rokinon on the left compared to the Sigma 30mm. And I have to say the Rokinon looks a touch sharper to me. And that's, I think, probably the first lens that I've ever compared side by side to the Sigma 30mm in which the other lens looked sharper. It is a very, very good result. In the corners, again, it looks a little bit better in my opinion. In the center, it looks a little bit better as well. When I compare this Rokinon to the Samyang, in this case, you can see an even greater advantage in sharpness with the Rokinon lens. Let's take a look at what happens when you compare all three of these lenses for portrait work. So the Rokinon again on the left versus the Sigma 30mm. Again, I'd say the Rokinon and the Sigma are very, very close. I can't even give an edge to either one. Honestly, I'd say this is a straight up tie. And even as you move and look at the bokeh on the Rokinon is very nice and pleasing. It looks almost as smooth as the Sigma. I would say it gets 97 to 98% of the way there. Now, as you compare this Rokinon to the Samyang, at the exact same settings, you'll see that the Samyang is letting in a lot less light. So this is f2.8 versus f1.8. Samyang is still nice and sharp, but the Rokinon is just a touch sharper. Now, the one area in which the Rokinon did not perform as expected is in the area of chromatic aberration or purple fringing. As you can see in these two side-by-side comparison photos, the Rokinon does suffer from some pretty significant chromatic aberration, especially even compared to the Sigma 30mm. I was surprised to see so much color fringing all throughout the frame. As you stop the Rokinon down to f2 and f4, obviously the chromatic aberration is less of an issue, but I was surprised to see so much of it wide open at f1.8. So overall, this lens is a very, very good performer. Now, when it comes to autofocus, that was one of the things that impressed me very much about this lens. Obviously, it's sharp. You guys just saw that. Very sharp lens, even wide open in the center and even in the corners wide open. But beyond that, the autofocus performance on this Rokinon is on par with a native Sony lens. I would say it's just as quick, just as snappy, and almost just as silent. Now, the focus motors inside of this lens are stepper motors. I don't believe that they are linear motors, at least not from what I've read, but they are very, very quiet. In fact, let me see if I can have my microphone pick up the noise that they make. Eye autofocus was very easily nailed with this in photo and video mode. Tracking also works just like it is supposed to. I'd say this is one of the first third-party lenses that I can confidently say the autofocus is almost identical to the Sony equivalent. So I would not even recommend buying the Sony 35 f1.8 full frame if you're worried about autofocus performance. I would say both of those lenses are going to perform equally just as well. So in summary, this is a great performing lens and it has impressed me, certainly from the standpoint of, again, autofocus performance and sharpness. And there are some other positives as well. It's very lightweight, it's very compact, inexpensive. I mean, the price on this is $399, so $400, which is almost half of what you would pay for a Sony equivalent of this lens for full frame. It's also weather sealed, as I mentioned before, and it has that awesome custom switch on the side, so you can program it somehow. I haven't really quite figured it out yet. Now, as far as negatives, number one is what you guys already already saw, the chromatic aberrations wide open are pretty apparent and could be an issue for some folks. The second thing that I noticed is the minimum focusing distance on this lens is not ideal for very close-up shots. Again, it's about a foot that you have to be away from the object in order to get that focus. I know that the Sony 35 does a little bit of a better job in that regard. You can get a little bit closer to your objects and still nail focus. That's not a huge issue on a 35mm, but worthy of note. And the last negative that I'll mention about this lens is vignetting wide open. There is a bit of noticeable vignetting in the corners, even on an APS-C camera, which is pretty interesting. But again, vignetting is less of an issue because it's easily corrected in post. I would say overall, Rokinon did an exceptionally good job of producing this lens. Easily a lens that I could recommend and I would recommend if you guys are in the market, especially if you have both APS-C camera bodies and full-frame Sony camera bodies. I'd say that this is an excellent value. Excited to see what comes next from Rokinon. If they could come out with a lens that is like this, so take all of the nice things about this lens, give me this in a 10mm f1.8 or f2.8, I don't even care, with autofocus, get me a good, nice, ultra-wide prime, that would make my year. So let's make that happen in 2021. That would be awesome. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something. As usual, leave some comments down below. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this lens. As always, I'll leave some links down in the description below to Amazon and B&H in case you guys want to check prices or sales or buy this lens. Definitely check those out. You could read more specs about it as well. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for all of your comments. Thanks for all of your support. Stay tuned for more and have a nice day. Bye-bye.